Imagine being a respected judge driving through your own neighborhood only to be pulled over by a cop who instantly assumes you've stolen your own car. What would you do if, despite your authority and accomplishments, you were treated like a criminal simply because of your race? And when the truth finally comes out, how do you think the officer will react when they realize who you truly are? The shocking story will make you question, how often does this happen? And what does it take for justice to truly prevail? Before we begin this heartfelt story, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from today, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. Isaiah Carr brushed a speck of dust off the dashboard of his brand new Lexus. It was only a week old, but he already treated it like a prized possession. The leather seats had barely lost their factory shine, and the smooth purr of the engine gave him a sense of satisfaction that felt almost tangible. He'd just come from his office at the courthouse, a long day behind him filled with back-to-back hearings, paperwork, and the weight of other people's problems. But this drive down the wide tree-lined streets of Winterdale, Michigan was his favorite part of the day. It allowed him a moment to decompress, to feel in control again. The calm streets with their grand sprawling homes set back from the road were a sharp contrast to the tension that often followed him at work. But the momentary peace in his mind didn't last long. Just as Isaiah started humming along with the smooth rhythm of the jazz on the radio, flashing blue and red lights pierced the evening calm. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the unmistakable sight of a police cruiser tailing him. His heart skipped a beat and his fingers instinctively tightened around the steering wheel. He pulled over without hesitation, confused but compliant. The neighborhood was quiet, far from the chaos of city life, and Isaiah hadn't been speeding. He knew that much. In fact, he'd been driving under the limit, enjoying the leisurely drive home after a long week. So what could he have possibly done wrong? A sharp rap on the window cut through his thoughts. He turned to find a tall, broad-shouldered officer peering down at him, her face unreadable, her hand resting conspicuously close to the gun holstered at her side. License and registration, she barked without the courtesy of a greeting. Isaiah complied, silently reaching into the glove compartment to retrieve his documents. The officer, her nameplate reading Officer Rhodes, snatched the papers from his hands without so much as a glance in his direction. She scanned the papers, her eyes narrowing as they darted back and forth between the documents and Isaiah himself. Step out of the car, she ordered. Isaiah blinked. Excuse me, out now, she repeated, her voice harder this time, leaving no room for argument. Isaiah hesitated for a moment, his mind racing to comprehend what was happening. He was a judge, a respected one at that. In fact, he had presided over cases that likely involved Officer Rhodes' own department. He was on familiar ground in Winterdale, a place where he knew people, where he was known, and yet here he was being treated like a suspect. Ma'am, there must be some misunderstanding. I'm Judge Isaiah Carr. This is my car and I live just down the street, he explained, keeping his tone measured. Officer Rhodes raised an eyebrow, her hand shifting ever so slightly toward her gun. Step out now. Swallowing the rising wave of indignation, Isaiah complied. He wasn't going to make things worse. Not here, not now. He opened the door and stepped out, standing beside his car as Officer Rhodes eyed him with a look that sent a chill down his spine. She walked around him slowly, as if sizing him up. I've had reports of a vehicle like this stolen last week, she said, her eyes fixed on him as though he'd confessed to the crime himself. Isaiah's jaw tightened. This is my car. I purchased it from the dealership a few days ago. If you run the plates, it will come back clean. She didn't seem to hear him, or maybe she didn't care. Hands on the hood, she snapped, stepping toward him. This is unnecessary, Isaiah protested, his patience fraying at the edges. I've done nothing wrong. Officer Rhodes's eyes glinted with something he couldn't quite place. Was it suspicion or something more sinister? You're going to do as I say or we'll have a problem, she said, her voice hard and unyielding. Isaiah's blood ran hot, but he reminded himself to stay calm. He wasn't just anyone. He knew how to handle situations like this. He knew his rights and he knew the law, yet despite everything he'd worked for, everything he'd achieved, it felt as though none of that mattered right now. With a deep breath, Isaiah complied, placing his hands on the hood of the car. He felt the eyes of the nearby residents on him, curtains twitching as neighbors peeked out to watch the spectacle unfolding in front of them. The humiliation stung more than anything else. He had worked his entire life to rise above moments like these, to prove himself to be respected, but here he was being reduced to a common suspect in front of the people he lived among. Officer Rhodes began patting him down roughly, her movements brusque and devoid of any respect. We've had reports of car thieves in the area, she said. This vehicle matches the description of one stolen last week. Isaiah clenched his jaw. I already told you this car was purchased a few days ago. If you'll allow me to explain. Save it for the station, she interrupted. Reaching for her handcuffs, Isaiah's heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to speak calmly, clearly. Officer Rhodes, I suggest you call your superior before you make a decision. You'll regret. Her hand hovered above the cuffs. You expect me to believe that? Isaiah looked her in the eye, unwavering. I expect you to verify my identity and do your job properly. Something shifted in her expression, just a flicker of uncertainty. Her confidence wavered and she took a step back with a huff of frustration. She reached for her radio and muttered into it, keeping her gaze locked on Isaiah. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Isaiah stood there, hands still on the car, while Officer Rhodes kept glancing between him and her radio, waiting for confirmation. The air between them crackled with tension, and Isaiah couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, neighbors still peeking from behind their curtains witnessing his humiliation. Finally the radio crackled to life and a voice came through on the other end. Rhodes, stand down immediately. Judge Carr is a respected member of the community. I'm on my way. Isaiah straightened, feeling a surge of relief, but the damage had already been done. His dignity had been tarnished, and no amount of apologies could erase the humiliation he'd endured. Officer Rhodes's face flushed with embarrassment as she lowered her radio. She hesitated for a moment, then muttered, I'm sorry, Your Honor, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. Isaiah adjusted his jacket. His composure regained, though the anger still simmered beneath the surface. A misunderstanding, he echoed, his voice calm but firm. That's what we're calling racial profiling now, officer. Before she could respond, another police car pulled up and a tall man with graying hair stepped out. Captain Reynolds, head of the local precinct, approached with an air of urgency. Judge Carr, he called out as he approached, his expression grave. I can't begin to apologize enough for this incident. Rest assured we'll get to the bottom of it. Isaiah nodded, but his mind was already racing with the implications of what had just happened. This wasn't just about him anymore, it was about the countless others who had been wrongly accused, harassed, or profiled. And now, as he stood there with Captain Reynolds offering his apologies, Isaiah made a decision that would change the course of his life and the lives of many others. Captain, Isaiah said, his voice steady and authoritative, I'd like to speak with you and Officer Rhodes, not as a victim but as someone who believes we can turn this incident into an opportunity for real change. Captain Reynolds looked taken aback by the request, but there was respect in his eyes. Of course, Your Honor, whatever you need. Isaiah nodded and glanced around at the neighborhood, the quiet street, the houses with their curtains still drawn. He had worked too hard to be reduced to this, to be seen as nothing more than a suspect, as a threat, but he also knew that moments like this could become something more. They could be the catalyst for growth, for understanding, for change. As they walked toward Captain Reynolds' car, Isaiah couldn't help but wonder if this moment, this public humiliation, could be the start of something bigger. Could this be the spark that ignited real conversations about the system, about justice, about what it meant to be truly seen for who you were, not the color of your skin? Little did he know this was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about justice, prejudice, and the power of one person to make a difference. Isaiah stood in his home later that evening, the familiar comfort of the space offering little relief from the weight pressing down on him. The encounter with Officer Rhodes replayed in his mind, every detail sharp, every word echoing like a warning. He knew this wasn't a singular event. It wasn't about one mistake or one person. It was the result of something bigger, a system he thought he understood but now realized he was deeply entangled in, for better or worse. His wife, Denise, entered the room, sensing the tension in his posture even before he spoke. Isaiah, what's wrong? She asked, placing a hand on his shoulder. She knew him well enough to see the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. He sighed deeply, rubbing his temples as if that could ease the frustration building since the traffic stop. You won't believe what happened today. I was pulled over, accused of stealing my own car. Denise's eyes widened in disbelief. What? You? Here in Winterdale? He nodded. Yeah, by one of our own officers, Rhodes. She had me get out of the car, hands on the hood, the whole humiliating drill. The neighbors watched, curtains moving, but nobody came out. Not a word. Not a soul. Denise's expression shifted from concern to anger. Isaiah, this is unacceptable. You're a judge, they know you. And that's exactly the problem, Isaiah replied, his voice low but fierce. It doesn't matter who I am or what I've achieved. In their eyes, I was just another black man driving a nice car in the wrong neighborhood. If it can happen to me, what does that say for the others who don't have the same resources, the same protection? Denise shook her head, her frustration mirroring his. This is ridiculous. Something has to change. Isaiah walked to the window, staring out at the perfectly manicured lawns and neatly parked cars. I talked to the captain afterward, suggested a program, something to teach these officers about what it's like for us on the other side of the badge. But it's not enough. Denise moved closer, her voice softening. What are you going to do? Isaiah turned toward her, his jaw set with determination. I'm going to use this. I can't let this moment slip by. We've been complacent for too long. I want to sit down with Officer Rhodes, with the entire precinct, and show them what real justice looks like, not just for me but for everyone. Denise smiled faintly, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. I know you will. But be careful, Isaiah. These things, they don't change overnight. You'll be pushing against a lot of resistance. Isaiah nodded, knowing full well the truth in her words. That's why it has to start now. The following week, Isaiah found himself standing before a group of police officers in a conference room at the Winterdale Police Department. The air in the room was thick with tension, as if the weight of past mistakes and unspoken accusations hovered just above their heads. Officer Rhodes sat among them, her face tight, her eyes flickering between discomfort and defiance. Isaiah could sense the battle going on inside her, whether to admit she had been wrong or to double down on the assumptions she had made. Captain Reynolds stood near the back, arms crossed, watching intently. Isaiah cleared his throat and began. I'm not here to lecture anyone, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm here because I believe something needs to change. Last week, I was pulled over by one of your officers. It wasn't because I was speeding. It wasn't because I was breaking the law. It was because I was driving a nice car in a neighborhood where I apparently didn't look like I belonged. The room remained silent, but Isaiah could feel the discomfort growing. A few officers shifted in their seats. One or two glanced at Rhodes, who stared straight ahead, her face a mask of indifference. I've spent my entire career working to uphold the law, Isaiah continued. I've sat in courtrooms day after day, watching people's lives change with a single decision. I've worked hard to ensure that justice is served fairly and impartially. But last week, I was reminded that no matter how far you climb, no matter what title you hold, there are still some battles that you can't avoid. His gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of each officer one by one. This isn't about me. It's about the system. It's about the way we see each other. It's about the assumptions we make when we look at someone like me behind the wheel of a nice car. Isaiah could see a few heads nodding subtly, but most of the room remained stoic, the walls of defense firmly in place. We can't change everything overnight, he said, echoing Denise's words. But we can start small. We can start by having conversations like this, by challenging those assumptions, by understanding that every time you make a decision based on bias, you're not just hurting one person. You're hurting the community, the justice system, and the trust that's supposed to exist between us. Officer Rhodes finally spoke, her voice stiff. I was just doing my job, sir. We had reports of a stolen car, and yours matched the description. Isaiah nodded, his expression calm. I understand that, officer. But when I told you who I was, when I offered to show you proof, you didn't listen. You assumed I was lying. That's the problem. It's not about following orders, it's about recognizing when those orders are flawed. The room fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking in. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his voice quieter than before. We've all seen it, Judge Carr. We know the biases are there. But the question is, what do we do about them? Isaiah met his gaze. We start by acknowledging that they exist. And then we work together to dismantle them. There was a murmur of agreement in the room, and for the first time, Isaiah felt like maybe, just maybe, they were starting to understand. It was a small step, but it was something. Weeks passed, and the tension from that meeting slowly began to fade. Officer Rhodes had agreed to shadow Isaiah in his courtroom, an offer he had extended to help bridge the gap between the badge and the bench. It wasn't easy at first. Her rigid demeanor and cool detachment were hard to break through. But Isaiah was patient. One afternoon, after watching him preside over a particularly difficult case involving a young black man falsely accused of assault, Rhodes finally broke her silence. I never realized how much of this is out of their control, she admitted quietly, standing beside Isaiah after the courtroom had emptied. Isaiah glanced at her, surprised by the vulnerability in her tone. What do you mean? Rhodes sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. I mean, you hear things in the station, you see people brought in, and you start to make assumptions. We're trained to follow protocols, but we're not trained to understand what happens after. I've been sitting here, watching you, watching these people's lives get torn apart by a system that's supposed to protect them. It's different when you see it up close. Isaiah nodded, his voice gentle. It's different when you live it. Rhodes looked down, her jaw clenched. I'm sorry for what happened that day. I really am. Isaiah didn't respond right away. He could sense the internal struggle she was going through, the process of unlearning that was far more painful than anyone cared to admit. Apologies are a good start, he finally said. But what really matters is what you do next. Rhodes nodded slowly. I know. And I want to do better. I want to understand. Isaiah smiled, a small flicker of hope sparking inside him. That's all I can ask for. A month later, Winterdale found itself the subject of national headlines. A local contractor, Apex Builders, had been exposed for running unsafe construction sites and bribing city officials to overlook violations. The story was big enough on its own, but what made it even more explosive was the involvement of high-ranking officers within the Winterdale Police Department, some of whom had been complicit in covering up the company's wrongdoings. Isaiah had heard whispers of the scandal before it broke wide open. He had presided over a few cases related to the construction company and had started piecing things together. But the full extent of the corruption didn't hit him until one late evening, when his phone buzzed with a message from Aaron, a detective he'd known for years. We need to talk. Urgent, ****. Isaiah met Aaron at a quiet diner on the edge of town. It was nearly deserted, just a few late-night patrons hunched over cups of coffee. Aaron slid into the booth across from Isaiah, his face etched with worry. What's going on? Isaiah asked, his voice low. Aaron glanced around, then leaned in. Apex Builders, they're in deep with some people at the top of the department. Bribes, falsified reports, you name it. And it's bigger than we thought. Isaiah frowned. How big are we talking? Aaron hesitated, then spoke in a whisper. I think the chief's involved. Maybe even the mayor. Isaiah felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a simple case of a few bad actors. This was systemic, and it reached further than he had ever imagined. They'd been trying to silence people, Aaron continued, his voice tense. Some of the officers who were involved have been burying complaints. And now that the story's breaking, they're scrambling to cover their tracks. Isaiah leaned back in his seat, the weight of the situation settling in. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one I trust, Aaron said, his gaze steady. And because I need your help. You're in a position to do something about this, to make sure the truth comes out. Isaiah nodded slowly, his mind already racing with the implications of what Aaron was saying. If the corruption went as high as Aaron suspected, then this wasn't just a local issue. It was a threat to the entire community's trust in its leadership. All right, Isaiah said finally. I'll help. But we need to be careful. If they're willing to cover up this much, they won't hesitate to go after anyone who gets in their way. Aaron nodded grimly. I know. That's why we have to move fast. Isaiah spent the next few days quietly gathering evidence, reviewing court records and complaints that had been dismissed without cause. The deeper he dug, the more he realized just how entangled the police department was with Apex Builders. Payments, off-the-record meetings, and falsified reports pointed to a web of corruption that threatened to ensnare anyone who got too close. And it wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and the unchecked authority that allowed those in charge to act without consequence. Late one night, as Isaiah pored over documents in his home office, his phone buzzed again, another message from Aaron. They know. Be careful, ****. Isaiah's pulse quickened. He had known this was a possibility, that the more he uncovered, the more dangerous things would become. But seeing those words in front of him made it all the more real. He stared at the message, the silence of the house pressing in around him. Outside, the wind stirred the branches of the large oak tree in his front yard, its leaves rustling softly, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his life. Isaiah knew he couldn't do this alone. He needed people he could trust, people who would stand by him when things got messy. And he knew exactly who to call. The next morning, Isaiah met with Aaron again, this time in a small park on the outskirts of town. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the grass, and the air was crisp with the promise of fall. Aaron was already there when Isaiah arrived, pacing by a bench, his brow furrowed in concentration.
"Thanks for coming," Aaron said, shaking Isaiah's hand as he sat down.
"I don't have much time, but we need to talk strategy."
Isaiah nodded, scanning the park for any signs of unwelcome visitors. "How bad is it?"
"Worse than I thought," Aaron admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I've been keeping my head down, but I've heard enough to know that they're onto us.
They've been watching me, too. We don't have much time."
Isaiah leaned forward, lowering his voice. "We need to get our hands on the internal police records, everything related to Apex Builders and any communications between the officers involved.
That's the only way we can expose them." Aaron nodded.
"I've been working on that. There's a chance I can get into the department's database, but it's risky. If anyone catches wind of what I'm doing, it's over for both of us."
Isaiah sighed, rubbing his temples.
He knew the stakes, but he couldn't turn back now. Too many people's lives had already been damaged by this corruption. He had to see it through, no matter the cost. "Let's be smart about this," Isaiah said. "We'll keep our circle small, you, me, and maybe one or two more people we can trust. We'll need all the evidence we can get, and once we have it, we'll go public. The media, the Attorney General's office, someone outside this town who can't be bought." Aaron nodded again, his eyes hard with determination.
"I'll get started on it tonight. But we need to be ready for anything, Isaiah.
If they find out we're going public, they'll come after us with everything they've got."
Isaiah's jaw tightened. "I know. But they won't scare us off."
That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the quiet streets of Winterdale, Isaiah sat down with Denise, explaining everything in full detail. She listened intently, her face growing more serious with each passing moment.
When he finished, Denise shook her head in disbelief. "Isaiah, it's dangerous. These people are powerful.
What if they try to hurt you?" "I can't back down now, Denise," Isaiah replied, his voice steady.
"If I don't do this, who will? I've seen what these people are capable of. They're ruining lives, and no one is holding them accountable."
Denise took a deep breath, her eyes filled with both pride and fear.
"Just promise me you'll be careful. You have a family, Isaiah. We need you."
Isaiah reached for her hand, squeezing it gently.
"I promise."
The following week was a blur of covert meetings, late-night phone calls, and careful planning.
Isaiah and Aaron worked tirelessly, gathering as much information as they could without drawing attention to themselves.
They combed through old case files, reviewed court documents, and quietly spoke to a few key people who had connections to Apex Builders. Every new piece of evidence they uncovered painted a clearer picture of the corruption that had infiltrated Winterdale. High-ranking officers in the police department had been receiving kickbacks from Apex Builders in exchange for ignoring violations and falsifying reports. The company had been cutting corners, endangering the lives of its workers and the community, all while lining the pockets of those who were supposed to protect the town. Isaiah knew they were sitting on a powder keg, and all it would take was one spark to set it off. But he was ready. He had spent his life upholding the law, and now he was about to use that very law to take down the people who had abused it.
One evening, Isaiah received a call from Aaron.
"I've got it," Aaron said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The records, everything. Payments, emails, phone calls, it's all here."
There's no denying it now. Isaiah felt a surge of adrenaline. "Where are you?"
"I'm at the station," Aaron replied.
"I'm printing everything out now.
Meet me at the diner in 30 minutes. Isaiah hung up the phone, his heart racing. This was it. They had what they needed. With this evidence, they could blow the whole thing open, expose everyone involved, and bring them to justice. But as he grabbed his keys and headed out the door, a nagging feeling of unease settled in his gut. He couldn't shake the sense that something was about to go wrong.
Isaiah arrived at the diner a few minutes early.
The dim lights cast long shadows across the empty booths, and the waitress behind the counter gave him a nod, recognizing him from his previous visits but otherwise paying him little attention. He sat in a booth near the back, his eyes scanning the parking lot through the large front window. Aaron was supposed to be here by now, but there was no sign of him. Isaiah's phone buzzed, a message from Aaron. On my way. 5 minutes, ***. He tapped his fingers on the table, his nerves on edge. The diner was quiet, almost too quiet. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second dragging on longer than the last. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Still no sign of Aaron. Isaiah's phone buzzed again, another message from Aaron, but this one made his blood run cold. They're on to me. Get out, ***. Before Isaiah could react, the door to the diner swung open, and 2 men in dark suits walked in. Their eyes immediately locked onto him. They didn't look like locals, and the way they moved with purpose told Isaiah everything he needed to know. He was in danger. Isaiah stood up, his heart pounding in his chest. The men walked toward him, their expressions unreadable. Judge Carr, one of them said, his voice cold and authoritative. We need to have a word. Isaiah backed away, his mind racing. He knew exactly what they wanted, and he wasn't about to let them silence him. Without another word, Isaiah bolted for the back door, his feet pounding against the tile floor as he raced toward the exit. The men shouted after him, their footsteps close behind, but Isaiah didn't stop. He couldn't stop. He burst through the back door and into the alley, the cool night air hitting him like a slap in the face. His heart hammered in his chest as he sprinted toward his car, parked just around the corner. As he reached for the door handle, a hand clamped down on his shoulder, yanking him back. Isaiah spun around, his fists clenched, ready to fight. But before he could throw a punch, a familiar voice stopped him cold. Isaiah, it's me. It was Aaron, his face pale and drenched in sweat. We've got to go. Now. Isaiah didn't ask questions. He jumped into the car, and Aaron followed, slamming the door shut behind him. They know everything, Aaron said, his voice breathless as he glanced nervously out the window. We've been compromised. Isaiah's hands tightened around the steering wheel. What do we do now? Aaron looked at him, his eyes filled with desperation. We need to go public, tonight. Isaiah drove in silence, the city lights blurring past them as they sped toward the one place where they could expose the truth without interference, the local news station. Aaron sat beside him, his breathing ragged as he clutched a folder filled with the evidence they had worked so hard to collect. This is it, Aaron said quietly, as if trying to convince himself as much as Isaiah. Once we get this out there, there's no turning back. Isaiah nodded, his jaw set in determination. I know. But we have no other choice. What brings a judge in AD? Him, his eyes filled with desperation. We need to go public, tonight. Isaiah drove in silence, the city lights blurring past them as they sped toward the one place where they could expose the truth without interference, the local news station. Aaron sat beside him, his breathing ragged as he clutched a folder filled with the evidence they had worked so hard to collect. This is it, Aaron said quietly, as if trying to convince himself as much as Isaiah. Once we get this out there, there's no turning back. Isaiah nodded, his jaw set in determination. I know. But we have no other choice. They arrived at the station just after midnight, the building eerily quiet except for a few late-night employees working the graveyard shift. Isaiah and Aaron made their way inside, flashing their IDs at the security guard, who barely glanced at them before waving them through. Once inside, they were directed to the studio where the late-night news broadcast was being prepared. The producer, a sharp-eyed woman named Lisa Chen, greeted them with a raised eyebrow. What brings a judge and a detective here at this hour? She asked, her tone skeptical. Isaiah didn't waste time. We have evidence of widespread corruption in the police department and city government. We need to go on air now. Lisa crossed her arms, clearly not convinced. Do you have proof? Aaron handed her the folder, his hands trembling slightly. Everything's in here, names, dates, payments, it's all there. Lisa flipped through the papers, her eyes widening as she scanned the contents. She glanced up at Isaiah, her expression serious. You realize what you're asking for, right? Once this airs, it's going to blow up. There'll be consequences for you, for everyone involved. Isaiah nodded, his voice steady.
We know. But this needs to be done.
Lisa studied them for a moment, then nodded.
All right. Let's do it.
The countdown to the live broadcast began. Isaiah and Aaron sat under the bright studio lights, their faces reflected on the monitors scattered around the room. The air was thick with tension as the seconds ticked down, and Isaiah could hear his own heartbeat in his ears.
Jeff Lawson, the anchor, introduced the breaking story, laying the groundwork for what would follow.
Then the camera turned to Isaiah and Aaron, and they told their story, laying bare the corruption that had plagued Winterdale. The broadcast lasted less than 30 minutes, but by the time it ended, the studio was buzzing with activity. Phones were ringing off the hook, social media was exploding, and the town of Winterdale would never be the same again. The fallout from the broadcast was swift and chaotic. Within hours, the story spread far beyond Winterdale, catching the attention of state and national news outlets. Protests erupted outside the police station and city hall, with citizens demanding resignations and criminal investigations. Isaiah and Aaron became the faces of a movement, their names and images plastered across headlines and television screens. But with the newfound spotlight came increased danger. The threats against them escalated rapidly: anonymous phone calls, unsettling messages, and strange cars idling near their homes. Isaiah had prepared himself for backlash, but the reality was more intense than he had anticipated. Denise grew increasingly anxious, the strain evident in her every action. "You can't keep doing this alone," she said one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, the remains of an untouched dinner between them.
"I don't have a choice," Isaiah replied, his voice firm. "This is bigger than me, bigger than any one person. If we stop now, they'll get away with everything."
Denise reached across the table, her hand trembling as she held his.
"I just want you to be safe. You have a family. Don't forget that."
Isaiah squeezed her hand, a flicker of guilt crossing his face.
"I won't. I promise."
Aaron, on the other hand, was in hiding. After the broadcast, a fabricated arrest warrant had been issued against him for alleged evidence tampering. Lisa Chen had warned him before the authorities arrived, giving him just enough time to evade capture. Now, he was moving from place to place, keeping a low profile while continuing to uncover the deeper layers of corruption.
One night, Aaron called Isaiah from a burner phone.
"They're not backing down," Aaron said, his voice tight with exhaustion.
"What are you talking about?" Isaiah asked. "There's more to this than we realized. Apex Builders isn't just cutting corners, they're tied to something bigger. Organized crime, maybe even human trafficking." Isaiah's grip on the phone tightened. "How do you know?" "I've been following a money trail," Aaron explained.
"There are payments going to offshore accounts, and the people behind it, they're powerful, Isaiah."
"More powerful than we thought."
Isaiah felt a chill run through him.
"This changes everything."
"It does," Aaron agreed. "And it means we're in deeper than ever."
Despite the increasing danger, Isaiah and Aaron pressed on.
Aaron continued to gather intelligence while staying under the radar, and Isaiah worked with Joseph, his contact at the Attorney General's office, to ensure the evidence they had was airtight.
The protests in Winterdale grew louder, with residents demanding immediate action.
Several officers within the police department resigned, and a handful of city officials were placed under investigation. But the true masterminds behind the corruption remained hidden, their influence still casting a shadow over the town.
Then, one evening, Isaiah received a message from Aaron.
"Meet me at the warehouse on 5th Street.
Midnight. I have the last piece, ****. Isaiah's stomach churned.
The warehouse on 5th Street was a decrepit, abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Meeting there felt like a risk, but he trusted Aaron. He showed the message to Denise, who immediately looked worried.
"Are you sure this is a good idea?" she asked.
"I don't have a choice," Isaiah said.
"If Aaron says it's important, I have to go."
"Then take someone with you," Denise urged.
"Don't go alone." Isaiah nodded, knowing she was right.
He called Joseph, who agreed to accompany him. Together, they drove to the warehouse, parking a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. The area was dark and desolate, the wind carrying the faint sound of distant traffic.
Isaiah and Joseph approached the warehouse cautiously, their footsteps echoing on the cracked pavement. Inside, the building was even darker, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay. "Aaron?" Isaiah called out, his voice breaking the silence. From the shadows, Aaron emerged, clutching a folder. His face was pale, his movements jittery. "I've got it," Aaron said, holding up the folder. "This is it, the final piece. The link between Apex Builders and the people funding them." Before Aaron could hand over the folder, the sound of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Isaiah's heart sank as several men stepped out of the shadows, their faces obscured by the dim light. Well, one of them said, his voice cold. "You should have left this alone, Judge Carr." Isaiah instinctively stepped in front of Aaron, shielding him. "You're too late," Isaiah said, his voice steady. "The truth is already out." The man smirked. "Not all of it. And we can still stop you from spreading the rest." The men lunged toward them, and chaos erupted. One of them grabbed the folder from Aaron, scattering its contents across the floor. Isaiah fought back, but he was outnumbered, shoved against a wall as the men moved to escape with the evidence. Just then, the sound of sirens filled the air, red and blue lights flashing through the broken windows of the warehouse. The men froze, their plan interrupted as police officers stormed the building. "Drop it," an officer shouted. The men hesitated, but seeing the guns trained on them, they relented, raising their hands. The folder was recovered, and the criminals were handcuffed and escorted out of the warehouse. Isaiah leaned against the wall, catching his breath as Aaron approached him. "You okay?" Aaron asked. "Yeah," Isaiah said, though his body ached. "We did it." The arrests marked a turning point. The evidence they had collected, combined with the arrests, was enough to blow the case wide open. Investigations expanded, uncovering connections to organized crime and implicating powerful figures both within and beyond Winterdale. For the first time, Isaiah felt a glimmer of hope. Justice was finally catching up to those who had evaded it for so long. The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Indictments were handed down, trials were scheduled, and the people of Winterdale began to see the cracks in the system being repaired. Isaiah and Aaron were hailed as heroes, but they knew the battle wasn't over. One afternoon, as Isaiah stood on the steps of the courthouse, looking out over a town beginning to heal, Denise joined him. She slipped her hand into his, her touch grounding him. "How do you feel?" she asked softly. Isaiah took a deep breath, the weight of everything settling into a quiet resolve. "Like we've just taken the first step," he said. Together, they watched as the people of Winterdale continued their journey toward a better, more just future. The aftermath of the arrests and the broadcast was transformative for Winterdale. The town, once shrouded in secrecy and corruption, was now under the scrutiny of not just the media but also state and federal investigators. The revelations about Apex Builders and its ties to organized crime sent shockwaves through the community, leaving no corner untouched. Isaiah and Aaron remained in the public eye, not because they wanted to, but because their efforts had become a symbol of resistance against corruption and injustice. The courthouse, which had often been a place of despair for many, was now a focal point for reform and accountability. Investigations uncovered a sprawling network of corruption that extended beyond Winterdale. Apex Builders was revealed to be part of a larger criminal enterprise that used construction projects as a front for money laundering, human trafficking, and other illicit activities. Several high-ranking officials, including the mayor and the police chief, were implicated in the scandal. Despite the progress, the threats against Isaiah and Aaron didn't stop. If anything, they intensified. The people they had exposed still had resources, connections, and the will to retaliate. One evening, as Isaiah was leaving the courthouse, his phone buzzed. It was a call from an unknown number. Against his better judgment, he answered. "You think you've won," a voice growled on the other end. "But this isn't over. We'll be watching." Isaiah hung up, his jaw tight. He had grown accustomed to threats, but each one served as a reminder of the dangers he and those around him faced. Denise was particularly worried. Despite Isaiah's reassurances, she knew the risks were real. Their home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place under siege.
She took extra precautions, changing routines, installing security cameras, and ensuring their children were never left alone. "Isaiah," she said one night, her voice trembling, "we can't keep living like this. You've done so much already. Maybe it's time to step back." Isaiah looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "I understand," he said softly. "But if I step back now, it sends the wrong message. We have to finish this, Denise, for our family and for everyone who has suffered because of this corruption." Denise nodded reluctantly, knowing there was no changing his mind. Meanwhile, Aaron continued to lay low, though he remained in constant contact with Isaiah. His role in uncovering the network of corruption had made him a prime target, and the fabricated warrant against him still loomed. Lisa Chen and her team worked to expose the false charges, but it was an uphill battle. One night, Aaron called Isaiah with an update. "I've been digging," Aaron said. "There's still more to uncover. The people we exposed were just middlemen. The real power players are still out there." "Do you have anything concrete?" Isaiah asked. "Not yet," Aaron admitted. "But I'm close. I found some offshore accounts linked to Apex builders. If we can trace the money, we'll find the people pulling the strings." Isaiah felt a mix of determination and dread. "Keep me updated. And stay safe." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, court hearings, and strategy sessions. Isaiah worked closely with Joseph and the state investigators, ensuring that every piece of evidence was accounted for and every lead was followed. The trials of the arrested officials and Apex Builders executives became a national spectacle. Isaiah testified multiple times, recounting the evidence and his experiences with unwavering composure. His testimony, combined with Aaron's findings and Lisa's investigative journalism, left little doubt about the depth of the corruption. But the more they uncovered, the more Isaiah realized how far the corruption extended. The network they were dismantling wasn't just a local issue, it was part of a larger, systemic problem that stretched across cities, states, and even countries. One day, while reviewing documents in his office, Isaiah received a visit from Joseph. "We've got a lead," Joseph said, his expression serious. "A former Apex executive wants to talk. He's ready to flip." Isaiah leaned forward. "What's he offering?" "Names, locations, and details about the offshore accounts," Joseph said. "He's willing to cooperate in exchange for leniency." Isaiah nodded. "Set it up. This could be the breakthrough we need." The meeting with the former executive was held in a secure location under heavy guard. The man, visibly nervous, provided detailed information about the network's operations. He named key players, described how money was funneled through shell companies, and revealed plans for future projects that would have perpetuated the cycle of corruption. The information was invaluable, but it also painted a grim picture of the scale of the problem. Isaiah and Joseph realized that taking down the network would require not just legal action but also systemic reform. As the investigation expanded, the community of Winterdale began to rebuild. The protests, once fueled by anger and frustration, transformed into calls for unity and change. New leaders emerged, and citizens took an active role in shaping the future of their town. One evening, Isaiah stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a crowd that had gathered for a town hall meeting. "This isn't the end," he said, his voice carrying over the crowd. "It's the beginning of a new chapter for Winterdale. We've exposed the truth, but now it's up to all of us to ensure that it never happens again. Together, we can build a community where justice truly prevails." The crowd erupted into applause, their voices a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Later that night, as Isaiah returned home, he found Denise waiting for him on the porch. She wrapped her arms around him, her embrace filled with both relief and pride. "You did it," she said softly. "No," Isaiah replied, his voice filled with humility. "We did it." Though the battle against corruption was far from over, Isaiah knew that they had taken a significant step forward. And as he stood with Denise under the starlit sky, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Winterdale was on the path to healing, and he would continue to fight for justice, no matter how long it took. In the months that followed, the reverberations of the Winterdale scandal continued to spread. The trials of the corrupt officials and Apex Builders executives dominated the headlines, each revelation further cementing the extent of the wrongdoing. Some of the most powerful figures in the town, including the police chief and mayor, were convicted, their sentences serving as a stark warning to others who thought they were untouchable. Isaiah's work wasn't finished, though. He became a key figure in advocating for systemic reforms, not just in Winterdale but across the state. He was invited to speak at conferences, meet with legislators, and share the lessons learned from the town's reckoning. For Isaiah, it wasn't about fame or recognition, it was about ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he and countless others had faced. Aaron, meanwhile, slowly began to reclaim his life. The fabricated charges against him were dismissed after Lisa Chen's investigative team uncovered irrefutable evidence of the frame-up. Despite his exoneration, Aaron remained cautious. The dangers of their work had left lasting scars, both visible and unseen. One evening, Aaron met with Isaiah at a quiet cafe on the edge of town. "Feels strange to finally breathe again," Aaron said, sipping his coffee. Isaiah smiled, though his expression was tinged with exhaustion. "You earned it." "We both did." Aaron nodded but looked thoughtful. "What's next for you?" Isaiah leaned back in his chair, considering the question. "Change. Real, lasting change. It's not enough to punish those who were caught. We need to fix the systems that allowed this to happen in the first place." "You've always been the idealist," Aaron said with a grin. "But I think the world needs more people like you." They clinked their mugs together in a quiet toast, a moment of camaraderie after the storm they had weathered together. In Winterdale, the community's transformation was well underway. A new police chief was appointed, someone with a reputation for integrity and a commitment to rebuilding trust. The city council introduced measures to increase transparency, including body cameras for all officers and a civilian oversight board to handle complaints. One of Isaiah's proudest moments came when he was invited to speak at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for a new community center. Built on the site of an old, abandoned building once tied to Apex Builders, the center symbolized a new beginning for the town. Standing before a crowd of residents, Isaiah's voice carried hope and determination. "This center represents more than just bricks and mortar," he said. "It represents what we can achieve when we come together. When we refuse to let fear or corruption define us." Winterdale's story isn't one of defeat, it's one of resilience, of rising above, and of choosing to stand for what's right. The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers a testament to the town's renewed spirit. For Denise and Isaiah, life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy. The threats that once loomed over their family had diminished, though they remained vigilant. Their children, who had been shielded from much of the turmoil, began to thrive in the quieter, more hopeful environment. One evening, as Isaiah sat on the porch, watching the sunset, Denise joined him. She handed him a glass of iced tea and settled into the chair beside him. "You've done a lot of good," she said, her voice soft. Isaiah glanced at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. "We've done a lot of good." Denise leaned her head against his shoulder, the quiet of the moment wrapping around them like a warm embrace. Despite the progress, Isaiah knew the fight for justice was ongoing. The lessons learned in Winterdale needed to be shared, replicated in other communities facing similar struggles. He began working with advocacy groups, using his platform to push for statewide reforms. One day, he received an unexpected call from Joseph. "We've got an opportunity," Joseph said. "There's a task force being formed at the state level to address corruption in local governments. They want you on it." Isaiah's breath caught. "Me? Why?" "Because you've proven you can get things done," Joseph said simply. "And because your voice matters." After discussing it with Denise, Isaiah accepted the offer. The task force became a new chapter in his life, a chance to take the lessons from Winterdale and apply them on a larger scale. Though the work was challenging and often frustrating, Isaiah felt a renewed sense of purpose. He traveled across the state, meeting with communities, listening to their stories, and advocating for policies that would prevent the kind of corruption that had plagued Winterdale. One of the most impactful initiatives the task force introduced was a program to train officers and public officials in recognizing and addressing systemic bias. The program, developed in part by Isaiah,
emphasized empathy, community engagement, and accountability. Back in Winterdale, the town continued to rebuild. The scars of the past were still visible, but they served as a reminder of the resilience and determination of its people. New businesses opened, schools flourished, and the community center became a hub of activity, offering classes, counseling, and resources for residents of all ages. Isaiah often visited the center, sometimes giving talks or simply spending time with the people whose lives had been changed by its presence. It was a reminder of why he had fought so hard, why he had endured the threats and challenges. One afternoon, as he walked through the center, a young man approached him. "Judge Carr," the man said hesitantly. "Yes?" Isaiah replied, smiling warmly. "I just wanted to thank you," the man said, his voice filled with emotion. "I grew up here, and things were rough. But because of what you did, this place feels different. Safer. Better." Isaiah placed a hand on the young man's shoulder. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was all of us. And it's people like you who will keep this town moving forward." As the young man walked away, Isaiah felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The fight hadn't been easy, but moments like these made it all worthwhile. Isaiah knew the journey was far from over, but he also knew he wasn't alone. Together with his family, his friends, and the people of Winterdale, he had proven that change was possible and that justice, no matter how long it took, could prevail. The years following the Winterdale revelations brought a profound transformation, not just for Isaiah, Aaron, and their town but for communities far beyond. Isaiah's work with the state-level task force became a cornerstone of his career, providing him with a broader platform to fight for systemic change. Traveling to towns and cities across the state, Isaiah heard stories from people who had endured injustice and corruption similar to what he had uncovered in Winterdale. Each account fueled his resolve, reminding him why the fight was essential. The task force implemented initiatives that introduced transparency requirements for public officials, whistleblower protections, and independent oversight committees to monitor law enforcement and local government operations. Isaiah became a sought-after speaker at conferences and universities, where his insights into justice and reform resonated with audiences. His speeches weren't just about policy, they were personal. He shared his story, from his encounter with Officer Rhodes to the long road of uncovering and confronting corruption, emphasizing that change started with accountability and courage. Despite his rising prominence, Isaiah never forgot his roots. He maintained his role as a judge, presiding over cases with a renewed sense of purpose. In the courtroom, he became known for his fair and empathetic approach, ensuring that every person who stood before him felt heard and respected. Winterdale itself was a shining example of resilience. The new leadership in the police department and local government prioritized rebuilding trust with the community. Programs fostering youth engagement, job training, and community policing initiatives were introduced. The town's recovery became a model for other communities grappling with similar issues. Aaron, though reluctant to return to the public eye, played a key role in the ongoing reform efforts. He joined an independent investigative unit that worked with journalists and legal teams to expose corruption nationwide. His expertise and first-hand experience made him an invaluable asset, and he often credited Isaiah with giving him the courage to continue the fight. One day, Aaron visited Isaiah at his office, holding a stack of papers under his arm. "Got a new case," he said, dropping the stack onto Isaiah's desk. Isaiah raised an eyebrow. "And why am I looking at this?" "Because it's big," Aaron replied. "Bigger than Winterdale. There's a network of companies using government contracts to launder money." "Sound familiar?" Isaiah sighed, flipping through the papers. "You're relentless, you know that?" "Just following your example," Aaron said with a grin. Isaiah smiled, but his expression turned serious as he scanned the documents. The patterns were all too familiar: phony contracts, inflated costs, and officials willing to look the other way. "Let's do it," Isaiah said, his resolve firm. Together, they dove into the case, enlisting the help of Lisa Chen and her investigative team. It felt like déjà vu, but this time they were better prepared. The lessons they had learned in Winterdale guided their approach, and the team worked methodically to gather evidence and build a case. Meanwhile, Isaiah's personal life flourished.
His family had weathered the storm of threats and uncertainty, emerging stronger and closer than ever. Denise continued to be his unwavering support, and their children, now older, began to understand the gravity of their father's work. One evening, Isaiah's son, Malcolm, approached him with a question that caught him off guard. "Dad, do you ever get scared?" Isaiah paused, considering his answer. "Sometimes," he admitted. "But fear isn't a reason to stop. It's a reminder of what's at stake." Malcolm nodded thoughtfully. "I want to be like you someday." "Brave." Isaiah's heart swelled with pride. "You already are, son." The next big breakthrough in Isaiah and Aaron's new case came unexpectedly. A whistleblower from one of the implicated companies reached out, offering inside information in exchange for protection. The details they provided exposed a massive operation spanning multiple states, implicating business executives, politicians, and even law enforcement officials. The investigation culminated in a series of high-profile arrests and prosecutions. Once again, Isaiah found himself at the center of a media storm, but this time he felt more prepared. His reputation as a relentless advocate for justice only grew, and the cases he worked on sparked a national conversation about corruption and accountability. Back in Winterdale, the community thrived. The programs and reforms Isaiah had championed took root, creating a safer and more inclusive environment. The community center expanded its offerings, becoming a hub for education, mentorship, and cultural events. Isaiah often visited, quietly observing the life and joy that filled the space. It was a reminder of how far they had come and how much was possible when people united for a common cause. One day, as he walked through the center, he was approached by a young woman carrying a notebook. "Judge Carr?" she asked hesitantly. "Yes?" "I just wanted to thank you," she said, her voice earnest. "I grew up here, and because of you, this town feels different. Better. I'm studying law now because I want to make a difference too." Isaiah smiled warmly. "That means more than you know. Keep going, and always remember why you started." As she walked away, Isaiah felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The battles he had fought, the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the threats, they had all been worth it. Years later, Isaiah looked back on his journey with a mix of pride and humility. He had witnessed the worst of humanity but also its best, the resilience, the courage, and the capacity for change. And though the fight for justice was never-ending, he faced it with unwavering determination. Standing on the steps of the courthouse one crisp morning, he reflected on the words that had guided him through it all. "Justice isn't given, it's earned, fought for, and built by those who refuse to stand by and do nothing." Isaiah knew he would never stop fighting, and with each victory, he carried the hope that others would join him, ensuring a brighter, fairer future for generations to come. In the years that followed, Isaiah's name became synonymous with justice and reform. His tireless efforts to combat corruption and rebuild trust between communities and their leaders inspired people far beyond Winterdale. He was approached to write a book chronicling his experiences, a project he initially hesitated to undertake but eventually embraced. The book, titled Justice in Action, A Judge's Fight Against Corruption, became a bestseller. It detailed not just the Winterdale scandal but the broader systemic issues Isaiah had encountered throughout his career. His candid writing struck a chord with readers, sparking discussions in classrooms, workplaces, and government offices across the country. Isaiah's story also found its way into documentaries and academic studies. Universities invited him to guest lecture on ethics and governance, where he challenged students to think critically about the systems they lived in and how they could create positive change. Despite his growing influence, Isaiah remained grounded in his work and community. He continued to serve as a judge, ensuring that fairness and integrity guided every decision he made. His courtroom became a model for how justice could be served with empathy and respect, regardless of a person's background or circumstances. Winterdale, too, became a beacon of hope. The town's transformation inspired other communities facing similar challenges. Delegations from across the state visited to learn about the programs and reforms that had turned the town around. Isaiah often spoke at these gatherings, emphasizing the importance of transparency, accountability, and community involvement. Aaron also found a renewed sense of purpose. The investigative unit he joined grew into a nationwide organization, uncovering corruption and holding those in power accountable. His work often brought him back to Isaiah for collaboration, their partnership becoming a trusted and formidable force in the fight for justice. One of their most significant cases came a few years after the Winterdale scandal. A multinational corporation had been exploiting vulnerable communities, polluting their lands and evading responsibility through bribery and intimidation. Isaiah and Aaron worked together to expose the company's wrongdoing, their efforts leading to sweeping reforms in environmental and corporate regulations. As their work continued, Isaiah and Aaron developed a mentorship program for young lawyers, investigators, and activists. They believed that empowering the next generation was essential to sustaining the progress they had fought so hard to achieve. The program attracted bright and passionate individuals from diverse backgrounds, many of whom went on to make significant contributions to their own communities. On the home front, Isaiah found solace in his family. Malcolm and his younger sister, Layla, had grown into thoughtful, compassionate young adults. Malcolm pursued a career in public service, inspired by his father's example, while Layla used her artistic talents to advocate for social justice through storytelling and community engagement. One evening, the Carr family gathered for dinner, a rare moment when everyone's busy schedules aligned. As they laughed and shared stories, Isaiah felt a profound sense of gratitude. The battles he had fought had not only shaped his career but also brought his family closer together. Denise, ever his anchor, smiled at him across the table. "You've done so much good, Isaiah," she said. "But I think the best thing you've done is show our kids what it means to stand up for what's right." Isaiah reached for her hand, his heart full. "We did it together," he replied. As the years went by, Isaiah began to think about the legacy he would leave behind. While he had no plans to retire from his work anytime soon, he wanted to ensure that the principles he had championed would endure. He worked with community leaders to establish the Winterdale Institute for Justice and Reform, a nonprofit organization dedicated to education, advocacy, and policy development. The institute quickly gained recognition, hosting conferences and workshops that brought together activists, policymakers, and scholars from around the world. Its programs tackled issues ranging from criminal justice reform to environmental sustainability, reflecting Isaiah's belief that justice extended beyond the courtroom. In one of the institute's inaugural events, Isaiah stood before a packed auditorium, addressing an audience of young leaders. "Justice isn't a destination," he said. "It's a journey, one that requires courage, persistence, and compassion. Each of you has the power to make a difference, to challenge the status quo, and to create a world where fairness and dignity are not ideals but realities. Never forget that." The applause that followed was thunderous, a testament to the impact Isaiah had made on countless lives. In the twilight of his career, Isaiah looked back with pride and humility. The road had been long and fraught with challenges, but he had never wavered in his commitment to justice. He often thought of Winterdale as a symbol of what was possible when people refused to give up, even in the face of overwhelming odds. One quiet evening, Isaiah stood on the porch of his home, watching the sun set over the town that had been the center of his life's work. Denise joined him, slipping her arm around his waist. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice soft. "It is," Isaiah agreed, his gaze steady. As the stars began to appear in the sky, Isaiah felt a deep sense of peace. The fight for justice would never truly end, but he knew he had done his part. And as long as there were people willing to stand up, speak out, and fight for what was right, he believed the world would continue to move toward a brighter future. As Isaiah's life continued to evolve, his influence remained as strong as ever. Though he had reached a point where others often looked to him for wisdom and leadership, he never stopped learning, never stopped growing. He believed that justice, like life, was a constant work in progress, and his commitment to that ideal kept him moving forward. The Winterdale Institute for Justice and Reform flourished, becoming a cornerstone of national efforts to address systemic inequality and corruption. Isaiah took a less hands-on role in the day-to-day operations but remained an active advisor and advocate. The Institute's reach extended far beyond Winterdale, offering training programs, legal resources, and research that influenced policies across the country. One of the Institute's most notable achievements was the establishment of a scholarship program for aspiring public servants, lawyers, and activists from underrepresented communities. The scholarship bore Isaiah's name, a testament to his lifelong dedication to uplifting others. Seeing young people pursue their dreams, armed with the tools and opportunities he had fought to provide, filled him with immense pride. Malcolm, now a young politician, often sought his father's counsel. Isaiah watched as his son navigated the challenges of public service with integrity and determination, traits he had worked hard to instill. Layla, too, found her own path, using her art and storytelling to shine a light on social issues and inspire action. One day, Malcolm visited Isaiah at home with exciting news. "Dad, I've been nominated for the state assembly," Malcolm said, his face glowing with enthusiasm. Isaiah's eyes lit up. "That's incredible, Malcolm. I'm so proud of you." Malcolm nodded, but his expression turned serious. "It's a big responsibility, though. I want to make sure I do it right." Isaiah placed a reassuring hand on his son's shoulder. "You've got everything you need, Malcolm. Just remember who you are and why you're doing this. Lead with honesty, listen to the people you serve, and always strive to do what's right. The rest will follow." As Malcolm prepared for his campaign, Isaiah became one of his most trusted advisors. Watching his son step into a leadership role reminded Isaiah of his own journey, and he felt a deep sense of fulfillment knowing that Malcolm would carry forward the values he had spent a lifetime defending. Meanwhile, Layla's work as an artist gained recognition both locally and nationally. Her murals, exhibitions, and community projects reflected the stories of resilience, struggle, and hope she had grown up hearing. She often credited her father for inspiring her to use her voice and talents to make a difference. "Your work has a way of reaching people in ways laws and policies sometimes can't," Isaiah told her one evening as they walked through one of her exhibits. Layla smiled. "I learned from the best." The Carr family remained close-knit, gathering often to celebrate milestones, share meals, and support one another. Isaiah cherished these moments, knowing how precious they were. Though his public appearances became less frequent with time, Isaiah continued to mentor young leaders and contribute to causes that aligned with his vision of justice. He found joy in the simple things: reading on the porch, spending time with Denise, and walking through Winterdale's bustling streets, now filled with signs of renewal and hope. One day, Isaiah received a letter from a young woman who had attended one of his lectures years earlier. She was now a public defender, working tirelessly to advocate for those who couldn't afford legal representation. "I wouldn't be where I am today without your words," she wrote. "You reminded me that justice isn't just about the law, it's about humanity. Thank you for inspiring me to fight for what's right." Isaiah read the letter twice, his heart swelling with gratitude. It was letters like these, moments of connection and impact, that reminded him why he had devoted his life to this work.